Welcome to Transformative Principal. I'm your host, Jethro Jones, and you can follow me on Twitter at Jethro Jones. This episode is brought to you by John Catt Educational, a professional development publisher serving as the global leader in combining both research and practice in all materials. Find timely PD publications to support yourself and your faculty by visiting them online at us.johncattbookshop.com. Welcome to Transformative Principal. I am excited to have on the program today Jose Celis. Jose, welcome to Transformative Principal.
Thank you so much. This is such a pleasure to be on the show with you. I'm really excited to share my stories.
Well, thank you. I'm excited to have you. Can you just start out by telling us a little bit about your professional career, where you're at now and what you're doing, and kind of some interesting things about how you got there?
Sure. So currently I am an elementary school principal in New Jersey. I've been here in the school for 8 years now. Before this, I was out in Illinois. I was an assistant principal in a middle school and then in the principal of one of the elementary feeder schools. That district was predominantly an immigrant community, Mexican. It was a lot of fun. I learned a lot. Probably one of the most progressive, forward-thinking communities that I've ever been part of. Before that, I was a bilingual ESL teacher and a Spanish teacher. I found my way to education. The reality, the honesty, is because I hated lesson planning. I love teaching. I love spending time with the students and with their families. Lesson planning was just soul crushing in a lot of ways. I just didn't like investing that way. I became a school leader and I just love the role. It allows me just the opportunity to be creative, to be innovative, and to really just partner with all the different stakeholders and really think creatively on how we can support students from all diverse backgrounds.
I love that you hate doing lesson planning. I do too. I've always hated that, and it was the worst part of being a teacher, to be honest. Yeah, I wanted to be with the kids and work on the problems that they were facing and what they were struggling with, not necessarily try to force them into whatever I thought they needed at the time, which, I was usually a pretty bad judge of that, and I think we all are, so.
Well, it was that. I also had a really strict administrator in my first job. And he required these 5-page lesson plans every week. And I'll be honest, I was spending more time lesson planning than I was really thinking about what I was teaching. It was making sure that his forms were completed on time. So I didn't get into any more trouble. I did plenty of that myself.
Yeah, exactly. And you also got a master's degree in biblical and theological studies. It's interesting because I see education as all learning is spiritual. And so It's an interesting tie in there that you got your master's in that as well.
Oh, completely. I think that was probably one of the most important degrees I've ever completed. After teaching, I was a Spanish teacher for 2 years. And I had the opportunity to go back to my undergraduate institution, Wheaton College, and they offered, full ride scholarship to complete their biblical theological studies program. My wife and I took the opportunity. We actually thought of going overseas and being missionaries, training pastors in Latin America. But as fate would have it, after I completed that program, I realized my heart was really in schools. Working in the church and, for the church just didn't really satisfy me the way I thought it was going to. And I found my way, and that's when I became a bilingual ESL teacher, and I just loved it. But I think that the reason why that degree was so important, it gave me the purpose, right? It helped me understand the why of education. So during those 2 years, I did a lot of research in liberation theology. And it just really, when I started looking at the world through a different paradigm, when you start looking at the world through the idea of institution and institutional sin, and understanding how institutions were creating the conditions that helped some people in oppressive conditions, which institutions were, kind of allowed and maintained power dynamics. I'm like, it just began to make sense. And honestly, I've been building on that foundation all along. Right now, I'm actually in a PhD program. I just finished my last class in the coursework, so now I get to write the dissertation. And the focus is going to be on restorative justice. But I feel like all these different topics that we're going to talk about today, right? Liberation theology and restorative justice and inclusion are all so intimately connected and inform how I approach school leadership.
Yeah, that is really fascinating. And one of the things that you talked about before was looking at your community as three concentric circles. Can you explain that idea to us so that we can understand what you mean by that?
Sure. I had the opportunity to come back to New Jersey. I actually applied to this school on a whim. I remembered growing up, I grew up nearby, near where I work now. And I was like, yeah, sure, why not? Wayne sounds like a great town. And I applied, and little did I know how amazing the environment was going to be. So the school I work at right now is actually the best way I describe it, and the way I describe it to all one that doesn't know us, is three concentric circles. So the first, and so where the school is located, is the lake community. And these are really affluent families. These are the power brokers. These are people that really wield a lot of influence in the town. Outside of that, you have a lot of blue collar, white collar workers, just your traditional, run the mill, everyday Americans. And then the outside circle are the programs that we busted into our school. So we also have the ESL program, English as a Second Language program for our part of the district, and a self-contained special education program. And that creates really interesting dynamics in the school, especially when we started focusing on this idea of inclusion. How do we create and foster authentic relationships and friendships amongst all these different groups that traditionally tend to isolate themselves from one another? One of my goals to really create this authentic inclusion in our building where students are learning how to value one another, learning how to value each individual's contributions. Yeah, really learning how to live in a very diverse, complicated, and beautiful world.
What I love about that visual that you've created is that probably anybody listening to this right now could likely identify three different groups within their school that could create some natural silos where the kids wouldn't necessarily get together, the parents wouldn't necessarily get together. And what you've done is created as a single silo, which is your school, with divisions inside of that. And so instead of seeing it as something that says these are three separate circles that are like drawing circles on a page and away from each other, these are things that we all have in common. First, that we all go to this school and we're all part of this community, but then we can start blurring those lines between the circles, the barriers that were already established. And this is a real issue that schools all over the world have a problem with, is that we have these divisions that don't necessarily need to be there. And we put them there because that is how it's comfortable for us or something like that. And it doesn't have to be that way. And what I appreciate about this approach and the inclusion and restorative justice that we're going to talk about is that you see it not as those are dividing lines, but that those are simply the lines that exist that we need to then work to erase. Is that a fair way to summarize that?
Oh, definitely. I think, and I like what you were saying because it is ubiquitous, right? Across the world, across this country, there is this sense or the process of the way we organize ourselves into different groups, right? The in-groups, out-groups, and they take different forms depending on your community. At our school, it just happened to be, based on the population, you have the self-contained population that was isolated from the general education population, that was isolated from the ESL population as well, these immigrant students that didn't speak English. And it creates a lot of tensions. So it required a lot of intentionality. And I think that people sometimes don't recognize all the work that goes into inclusion. It doesn't just happen, naturally. It's by design. And the teachers are so invested in helping helping restructure the way that students relate to one another. But it really started with us understanding how we perceived and how we understood who the kids were, right? Because accidentally, maybe, unconsciously, we were kind of reinforcing some of these structures, the way that the students were self-segregating. So it really required initially for us to begin to do some reflective work, identify the structures, the practices in our school community that were reinforcing segregation, and then beginning to identify, creatively some strategies to begin to create opportunities for students to get to know one another and get to and learn how to value one another.
Well, and that segregation that you're talking about is not just along racial lines, but also when you have a special ed population that is in a self-contained area, that is a natural segregating point that forces those kids to be seen as different and separate from everyone else. And in fact, just 2 episodes ago on this podcast, I interviewed Chloe, who is a college student now. She has cerebral palsy, and her perspective on what school was like for her growing up was just fascinating. And it can be difficult to understand what she's saying because she's trying really hard, and she has this disability that prevents her from speaking what is really on her mind. But what's so amazing is that when she was in a place where she felt, and this is what she said, I asked her if there were any principals that made an impact on her, and she said that the principal that made the most impact on her was her principal her senior year of high school, because he was the first one who saw her as a person first and as someone with a disability second. And beautiful. I mean, I just got to say, imagine going until you're almost 18 years old and finally, for the first time, meeting someone who sees you as a person first, who's in a position of authority in the school. And I mean, her story is just so inspiring because she was able to persevere despite the obstacles that were placed in front of her.
Right. And it shouldn't have to be that way. These are children. We should have places where every child feels and experiences authentic belonging, love, they are valued. And I think that oftentimes, I think about my own experience, and I think that's what informs my vision for the school community that this vision for my school community. It's both having experienced exclusion. I was an immigrant student, came to the United States when I was 6 years old, had a hard time really understanding what was happening, but, ultimately came to realize, I was feeling the sense of, I didn't feel like I belonged. I felt there were certain practices, even though I believe my teachers loved and cared about me, and I believe my teachers were good, the structure of schooling didn't really work for me. I remember having and knowing, and not really knowing intimately or personally, but having students, with different disabilities in my school. And I remember laughing, at different times at them, not with them, at them. And now as an adult, being embarrassed by this and really saying, I don't want this to happen anymore. And now as a school leader, I have an opportunity to begin to change some of these patterns and creating a space where everyone is valued for who they are, and where kids have the opportunity to learn from and about each other in a safe and supportive environment. Yeah, a lot of things, personal experiences inform who I've become, but also just those things, those experiences that still in a lot of ways haunt me, because I'm not proud of the things I did or who I was as a child, and I want to do something differently now. I want to create a different type of community.
Yeah, when you are able to look back on how you were as a young person and make changes that are making the world better for those coming after us, I think that is so admirable and so noble, and definitely something that we want to continue encouraging and helping people do. John Catt Educational supports high-quality teaching and learning by providing publications that are research-based, practical, and focused on the key topics proven essential in today's and tomorrow's schools. The latest John Catt publications include a book whose bold, transformative ideas amaze and infuriate people around the world, according to one reviewer, a title from global leaders in curriculum planning, practice, and retrieval, one book that says stop talking and start doing with regard to teacher well-being, and much more. These books, used by educators of all roles across North America and worldwide, amplify fresh, engaging voices with practical strategies to create transformative change. Learn more in our show notes at jethrojones.com/podcast. So let's talk about what inclusion looks like for you at your school now. And when we say inclusion in education, we're usually talking about including kids from special ed, but I'm guessing that means a little bit more in your school than just including kids that have special needs.
Yeah, definitely. So inclusion for us, right? It definitely touches upon every aspect of schooling for us in terms of how do we create this environment where students have the opportunity to learn with each other and learn about each other in a safe and supportive environment. And it's more than just the academic focus, it's the social emotional focus as well. So we really look at creating, so having this vision of inclusion, saying everyone is valuable, everyone has a voice, everyone belongs. How do we not just model this, but how do we help all our students learn that this is something that they need to value as well, so that this is a community value, part of our DNA. So we've really looked at every aspect of our schooling, every aspect of our school building to really think about how does inclusion happen. So when I came into the building 8 years ago, one of the first things we did was, of course, moving the self-contained classrooms into their grade level appropriate wings. So whereas before they were isolated, they were all next to each other in one corner of the building. We moved teachers around to make sure that there was a place for them and a space for them. So that the physical layout of the building supported this vision. We began looking at what were the opportunities for authentic inclusion and identifying new opportunities for that to happen. So we developed an after-school program in collaboration with the PTO, where students could spend an hour after school doing fun, engaging activities. But the goal of it really was to create these opportunities for kids to spend time with each other outside of the traditional academic program to learn how to kind of cohabitate in the world. Now, one of our big initiatives right now is co-teaching, and really looking at opportunities for mainstreaming and for mainstreaming in across the grade levels, so that students are learning with each other. It's been really challenging just because of the work that has to go into teaching. So really working with teachers to understand the models of co-teaching, but also really embrace this vision for inclusion. What I say to them is that, the work that we're doing doesn't get any easier. We just get stronger. We get better at this. And it's just really kind of amazing to see how these different dynamics have really begun to reshape the culture of our community. Oftentimes when I saw inclusion in other settings, it was always these isolated events, celebrations, something special and out of the ordinary. And then in between, you had this vacuum. And I was I was really inspired by a neighboring district. We heard about this district called Berkeley Heights in New Jersey, and we had a teacher that was connected to them, and we went to visit their program, and I was just blown away. Students with physical disabilities, students with emotional, behavioral, academic learning disabilities, sitting right next to their gen ed peers, and they're all able to work together in this really amazing dynamic environment. All the right supports and resources are provided to the students and to the teachers to make sure it's successful. And when I saw it, I'm like, this is what I want. This is what I want for my students. This is what I want for my community. Just because I saw the full and authentic integration of all these different all these members of the community, and they were able to be successful with each other. And it was just really a powerful experience. And it's something that we've been working towards for the last, like I said, 8 years.
Well, I love that example, because when you mentioned the times to get together were one-offs and
Mm-hmm.
celebrations or whatever, that's not really inclusion. That's including somebody, sure, but
Mm-hmm.
it's not starting in the same place as everybody else, and it's not starting
Mm-hmm.
with making sure that we are together first and then pulling
Yeah.
away when that's the one-off, when that's the random thing that's happening. And so being able to bring that into fruition is really powerful. And I think especially the idea of you taking your classrooms and rearranging them and making it so that kids were in appropriate grade level bands, instead of being the special ed wing way over there. That's a big signal to everybody that this is what we really believe. And it to be honest, it makes it harder for teachers to push back against that. It makes it harder for kids to not be engaged in that process, because you're putting it right there in front of them and you're saying, this is what we believe, not just what we say we believe, but what we're actually doing to make sure that there is a physical space that represents this is what we believe. And that, Jose, is really, really powerful.
Oh, it was, and it's so exciting to see the transformation that happens with the students when they start internalizing these values. And I have, like, there's just this one story that I always tell to highlight the possibility, but also just the reality. Every year, our fifth graders get together with the other two feeder schools that will all go to the same middle school. We get together and go to camp. And we were at camp this one year, and I remember being on the blacktop. And, that year we had this amazing student, so kind, so generous. He would often, but he was also that student that would, that liked to give hugs. Sometimes too many hugs. Anyway, he went up to this one girl who was very popular, who was very, everyone liked. And he came up to her and he said, hug. And she said, sure. And they hugged. And then he said, hug again. And she's like, no, just one. That's okay. And he said, okay. And he walked away. And that was great to see that dynamic, that interaction. But what was really powerful was right afterwards, some students from the other schools went up to her. And I remember hearing one of them say, ew, why would you let him touch you? And her response, and it still like brings tears and it's beautiful. She's like, that's my friend. And that's what we do. And it was just the confidence, but also just the realization that he is an equal member of our community. Sure, he may, behave differently, but we've all learned how to, and we learned how to adapt to a new way of being, right? So we're not asking him. It was never asking for him to assimilate into mainstream society. It was saying, we're going to create something new together. We're going to create a new way of being, a new way of relating to each other. And when other people that don't understand ask us, we're going to have the confidence to kind of show them, not just tell them, but show them what's possible. And I think it was just a beautiful example of what inclusion can do for our communities and for our students when they begin to internalize these values. Because honestly, that's the world they're going to inherit, right? They're going to inherit a world that's beautiful and diverse and complex and complicated. And the sooner we give them the tools to learn how to manage that and negotiate relationships, the better off they're going to be. And I know we're talking a lot about special education, but the same honestly was true for our ESL population. In our town, the majority of students are actually Muslim. Which, definitely, especially, in the 2000s, it's been complicated. It's been complicated because of the animosity, because of the vitriol that is directed toward that community. And we've really had to be thoughtful in terms of how to create an environment where Muslim youth feel, once again, accepted and valued for who they are, especially in light of all the political and the rhetoric that's happening around them. And it's been challenging. It was always it was challenging at times, especially when there were in the news a lot of situations that painted the Muslim community in unfavorable ways.
Well, and I love that you made that connection, because that's the thing that I've always harped on, is that if you can have the appropriate relationships between kids with special needs and kids without special needs, or the appropriate relationships with kids with different religions or races or whatever, then it makes the transference of those skills from one of those to the other and back and forth and all around so much easier. Because what you're really saying is, as you mentioned, that girl, she saw that that student was part of her community, and it's okay, and this is how we act. And what's so good about that is that when these other opportunities come along for them to say, oh, why were you talking to that kid who's black? And that's gross. And no, it's not gross. It's totally fine. We're part of the same community. Why are you talking to this? Fill in whatever other issue you may have. And then you can get past that, because this is how we interact in our community. And a couple of things that I really loved about the story with the girl and the hug, is, one, the boy was asking for a hug, which is, an important thing to do, and something that all kids can benefit from, asking permission before they get in somebody else's space. Two, she was able to have good refusal skills to say, no, just one is fine. And he could be fine with that. And that doesn't turn into something more than, ew, gross, you're hugging me too much, or something like that. It becomes an appropriate way for people to tell other people where my boundaries are. And that's also something that we need to continue to work on and develop as a society. And I just love those stories of how that can happen, and that it's not as difficult as it may sound, that when you are inclusive, many other problems go away as well.
Definitely. But there's a lot of intentionality behind all those stories too, because, that girl had, there was a lot of opportunities for her to practice that, right? In our everyday throughout the year, where she learned how to manage both her own feelings and also the other students' feelings. How she learned how to advocate for herself, but also recognizing that she had something to offer and give that other student. So I think that there's like a lot of planning that goes behind the scene that teachers are doing and reinforcing on a daily basis that allows the students to begin to internalize these skills. And I think that's where it's kind of amazing. And I know that we're like, and I know that, this might be a great segue to talk about like why now I'm talking about restorative justice. Because I feel like restorative justice gave me a bigger umbrella to understand all the dynamics that are happening in a school and begin to create that. We have a consultant that works with us, Dr. Tom, out of Colorado State, and he always talks about this idea of the culture of care. Like, how do we create a culture of care in our school institutions, recognizing all the possible ways that students, that teachers, that individuals can be hurt? And it's really been something that we've been really kind of reflecting on, learning about, and trying to finding ways to be able to implement the values and the principles of restorative justice in an authentic way in our school community. The idea that everyone belongs, that everyone is valuable, practices that really reinforce listening to understand and not listening to argue, which is so countercultural to our school communities, right? We're always fighting over ideas and who's right. Restorative justice has really created a different type of dynamic that can create a different dynamic in our school communities. I think this is something that we're working towards. But really, how do we begin to see all the relationships and all these dynamics, and really thinking through how do we create an environment where all students feel valued, feel know that, once again, experience belonging, and that our values are, the principles guiding and informing our work really are aligned to this idea of helping students become fully who they are meant to be as human beings.
And respecting them enough to know that they get to determine what that thing is that they become. And this is where I love that, what you're saying about this culture of care. Is that what you said?
Yeah. Culture of care. Yeah.
Yeah. So the culture of care becomes we care about each other and you matter to us. And so inclusion and restorative justice, I mean, I think it's a perfect segue into that once you start including people, you now want to start making sure that the way you're dealing with learning and bad decisions is in a way that actually makes the whole entire community better because of how you're doing that. So, going back to that girl with the hug situation, if she refused him inappropriately, that's a way for you to have the conversation with her about what appropriate refusal skills look like. And it's not that she's in trouble, because she really isn't in trouble for that. She's just learning how. And so much of our discipline issues in the past several years have become about getting kids in trouble, when really it's just another thing that they need to learn.
Oh my gosh, completely. And we're even seeing it as, once again, what is the vision of our community has been in the past focused on assimilation. How do we get everyone to be the same or operate in the same way? And I think through inclusion and now through restorative justice, we're actually asking different questions about what does it mean to be a community, and what does it mean to be a community in a diverse, a community with diverse individuals. So the idea now is like, how do we create a space for everyone to be authentically who they are and who they're meant to be? And how does our community evolve to allow for everyone to be, in a sense, be different and not be afraid or to try to assimilate individuals into some kind of homogeneous community. It's really hard kind of acknowledging that there are these differences, that we value these differences, and that we actually prize these differences. Because it's really complicated when we have to negotiate relationships, negotiate communication, or negotiate so many different dynamics in the school environment when we're coming from different cultural or gendered or different, just ethnic perspectives. How do we create this environment where everyone belongs and everyone feels acceptance just because of who they are, not because of how well they fit in?
And how well they fit into something that is nearly impossible to fit in, which is to please everybody, which you just can't do. And yeah, I think that that's really great. So in closing, Jose, this has been a great conversation. I think we could probably have you back on the podcast again in the future. The last question I ask is, what is one thing that a principal can do this week to be a transformative principal like you?
Wow, that's a really great question. Wow, I wish I was more prepared for that one. Because I feel like, who am I to give advice to? Principals, I really do think that it is the most amazing and most complicated job in the world, because we are stuck between all these different stakeholders, and we're trying to manage and and thrive in these types of environments, right? I think for me, the most important thing, I'm going to give myself advice, because who am I to give somebody else advice? I don't know if I'm qualified, but for me, I think it's reminding me to remember what is my goal, what's my vision, what is that core that's driving my work, and how do I continue to reflect and evaluate all my decisions based on that. So for us at Pines Lake, it's like, so how do I, understanding, knowing what I know about restorative justice right now, and some of the values, how do I continue to ensure that every decision I make, whether it is a phone call with a parent, whether that's a conversation with a teacher or an interaction with a student, is aligned to the values, my values, and the values that are kind of described in restorative justice. Because I want to be authentic. I want to be coherent and authentic in everything that I do. And I think that would be my encouragement to other principals, right? Let's continue to practice and reflect on our practice to make sure that we are authentic in what it is that we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, well, I think that that is great advice. And Jose, I want to say thank you again for being part of Transformative Principal. And thank you for sharing your experience and your wisdom with everybody today. Thank you so much.
Oh, Jethro, I'll be honest, I had a blast and I really enjoyed this conversation. And I'm really just grateful for the work that you're doing, sharing these different stories. I think that there's so much that we can be and we should be learning from each other. So thanks so much for creating that this platform and this opportunity for all of us to grow together.
Thank you to our valued partner, John Catt Educational. If you are a leader looking to make transformative change by providing yourself and your leaders and teachers with professional development that is research-based and rigorous, yet easy to digest and full of practical strategies, check out the latest publications from John Catt. Visit us.johncattbookshop.com to find information on bulk orders or learn much more in our show notes. You can also use the code TRANSFORMATIVE to save a bundle at us.johncattbookshop.com.
Hey, middle school principals, what if I told you that all your teachers had to do to teach your students really valuable social and emotional competencies was just press play? In Control SEL is a fully automated video curriculum that teachers and students absolutely love. And that's because it's easy, and it looks just like a Netflix or a YouTube show. So all you have to do to hear about how it can completely transform your school is schedule your call. Tell us Jethro sent you and you'll get 20% off if you feel like it's a good fit. So go now to www.incontrolsel.com/strategy call to schedule your call today. The link will be in the show notes.